I'm here with Devan of Caius to talk about their record, the By the Moon and the Stars. I drew a blank there for some reason. By the Moon and the Stars, out August 2nd, an independent release. We'll get more into that. First of all, welcome to the channel. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for chatting about the band and to chat about the album.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited to be here, actually.
So let's get right into this. By the Moon and the Stars. Let me guess, you're a big Winterson fan?
Definitely one of my top bands, I would say. That's yeah, for sure.
The title kind of gave it away.
Yeah, it's a little, mm, yeah, maybe more common than you would think, but it's kind of more, I guess, related to like people like sailors traveling like across the ocean or whatever and using the stars to guide you. And we sort of felt that like a lot of the songs and the music for us kind of gave us a sense of direction and like a sense of purpose kind of. So that's where the name came from after we were looking at all the tracks when we put together the album.
So the name for the record was born after the songs were written.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Interesting, interesting. So how treacherous was the seas that led you to this record?
Um, I mean, I think definitely we were planning to have this recorded at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. So there was a little bit of delay just with COVID coming up and the pandemic. Our first drummer had to move back to Quebec to go help out his family. Same for me. I had to go help out my family over COVID, just like looking after family members. So that took a few of us kind of away from what we would normally be doing. So that definitely was a bit of a challenge. I was looking after like my mother-in-law who was diagnosed with cancer at the time. So that was pretty difficult, but she managed to go through chemo and everything's good. Um, but then as far as like finally getting back up and running, once we all were able to get back together, we definitely had some stressful nights like doing recording and all the editing and everything. And it's definitely after going through the experience, you sort of realize how much work it actually is. I think sometimes when people are kind of releasing an album and they're like, oh, we put so much effort and so much work into this, and you're kind of like, oh yeah, well, it wasn't that great of an album, but uh, they still like put a lot of time and effort
I was
went
going to
into
say, just
doing
because
it.
the album
So
is not great doesn't mean that there wasn't any work that went into it.
yeah, exactly. And I think like after doing this, it kind of made me realize a lot more, like trying to like dig into things a bit more in the music that I listen to of like thing like deeper than just like the face meaning or like the face value of it. So yeah.
So when you look at the end result now, the record is finished. It's just the release is around the corner on August 2nd. How much of this album was ready or was done at that point when the pandemic hit, and how much of it was then done afterwards when you guys got back together?
I think we had 6 or 7 of the songs done like when we were yeah, like at the end of 2019, and we had a few like the last three we kind of had some idea where we were going with them, and we sort of finished writing those like over the pandemic and just like remotely and stuff. And so yeah, we had quite a bit of it done. So I think like the last like 3 songs were also sort of like the first 6 or 7, we kind of wrote those all together at the front. And I think the last 3 songs, which would be For a Star, Terminus, and Reflections in the Water, which 2 of those we did the singles for. Those are kind of the more, I mean, I think they would be a bit more like uh developed than the other ones potentially. I mean, I like all the songs on there, like it's pretty hard to choose our set list sometimes. But all those songs are like the newer ones are, I think, would say more developed, maybe a bit more in depth, or like can't think of the right word, like intermediate than like a sort of like initial release. Um,
It's
yeah,
great for
so
me that you picked those because and I don't necessarily disagree with you. It's just that for me, a song like Deadwood is one of the most complete songs on the record.
oh yeah, that's cool to hear. That's
Yeah.
definitely one of my favorite. Um, and yeah, so I mean, I think that's the other thing that we opted to re-record like a few of the songs and put them on the album just to like do them a bit more justice, I think. So I'm happy to hear that that one is actually kind of one of the better, or one that stuck out to you a bit more
Yeah,
than
for me, that's
the
hands
others.
down my favorite song, hands down, like easily my favorite song on the record. Not to say that the other material is it's not good. And I'll tell you this story. I was listening to the record while I was shaving. I mean, one of the many times that I was listening to the record, I was shaving and I had the album playing on my little portable speaker, and my son comes in the room in the washroom, and he's like, "What are you listening to?" And I was like, why? This shit is good. Like, who are these guys? I haven't heard this before. Like, he was like, it sounds familiar, like the
Mhm,
style, but I don't think I've heard this before. And I was
mhm.
like, yes and yes. Like, I agree with both of his points. And speaking of that familiarity, I felt like this album had some sort of, I'm going to use this term, swampiness to
Oh yeah.
which gave me obviously some Kalma vibes, at least early
Mhm.
on Kalma vibes. Are you guys, and you specifically, are you a huge fan of the melodic death metal sound coming out of Finland?
Yeah, definitely. I think that probably speaks through the music pretty clearly. But yeah, definitely Kalmah is probably my favorite band. Uh, and like a lot of the other Finnish bands, obviously, like Ensiferum and Norther. So those guys, big inspiration for me. I mean, the other one would be like Amon Amarth, which I think that kind of sticks through a bit more, and then some black metal stuff. Jess is also kind of like the same, the other guitar player in the band. Yeah, so a lot of like, I think those bands kind of struck the right balance for me of just like the right amount of like the melody, but still having that kind of like more intense, like upbeat, kind of fast paced music. Whereas like I think sometimes mellow death can be maybe a little too mellow, which is fine. I love a lot of bands that are doing more of that style, but having that a bit more like, oh yeah, okay, it's a little bit trashy, a little bit like driving, pushing the pace, I think is something that's important for me in the stuff that I write.
And speaking of that, I felt like the production behind the album, not being an overly polished record, it's at times a little bit rough around the edges, like I said, swampy. Um, to me, there's positives and negatives with that approach. I mean, one of the positives is that it does give the sound a little bit more meat and makes the songs feel a little bit more rough, a little bit more raw, a little bit more heavy. Was that the thought process behind this style, this approach, going with this production versus going with a more modern style that cleans up things a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that was definitely something like when we were first thinking about doing the recording for the album was like, okay, well, we want it to sound good, where things become maybe a little bit too overproduced and polished, and it kind of maybe ruins like the immersion a little bit potentially. I mean, I like a lot of like really clean power metal stuff too. So I, not to say that I don't like that, but I think for our sound, it was trying to capture more so that live performance than and having that translate well, like from people who listen to the album and then see us play live. It's like you don't want to kind of do all the studio magic, put all the makeup on it, and then you hit the stage and it's like, well, it's not as good as the album, but which is, yeah, that's something that's important to me is, and I think the band as a whole is trying to do something that's realistic for what we can do live as well.
Do you see as you move forward that maybe those two worlds can become a little bit closer together and not as far apart as they are?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, like things when I listen to the album, I go, oh, why didn't we just do like one more take on that section? Or why didn't we, like try and like double tracking guitars or just like spending a bit more time and like doing this, that, or the other thing. And I think one, because it's like the first album that we recorded, there's going to be a lot of like learning steps there. So hopefully, I think the next one would be trying to like just clean up the playing. I think also just more time playing too, like will just improve that as well. But try and like clean that up and have the recording be a little bit more solid and maybe a little bit more seamless, but trying to maintain a bit more of that kind of like raw sound, which is, yeah, for me, a lot of the music that I really enjoy kind of has that more unpolished. You can tell that they're doing full takes or like actually like playing their instruments. Not that other people aren't. I would say like there's some really good guitarists out there, but it doesn't give you that kind of like triumphant like feeling when you're listening kind of thing.
Yeah, when I was listening to the record, I definitely got the idea that this album, in terms of how we will translate to a live setting, is going to be seamless because it almost feels like an album that was recorded in a jam session, and you guys
Mhm.
took like one take, you recorded, and the way it is the way it ends up on the record. It has all of the, organic intricacies that would come with that style of recording. It doesn't come across as an album that you guys spend countless hours tweaking every single detail to get every single detail absolutely perfect.
Yeah, yeah, I would definitely say, yeah, that's pretty much right. I think you can only do so much too once you've hit the studio and then go back to doing all the mixing as well, where it's like next time kind of thing.
There's always next time. I
So
mean, I think you have to take everything as it comes, and you have to keep things in perspective. I think, um, you always gonna look back at a record and see spots where you could have done better. But that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, is you because where you are by the time the album comes out is not necessarily where you were when you were making the album.
yeah, totally.
And speaking of where you were and where you are, what is your songwriting approach? How would you define yourself as a songwriter?
Usually the way that we write songs is mostly like for me, I think I've sort of like tried to pick all my favorite parts from bands that I like and try and bring them all together. So stuff like the like down picked kind of like harmonized guitars, that's like pretty prevalent in like thrash or like a lot of like kind of at the gates sort of mellow death, or I mean even like, yeah, like Kalma does it a ton. And then combining that with like trem picked harmonies, I think that's the biggest thing. I think those like first and third harmonies just like sound amazing, like with two guitars. So it's usually trying to know exactly what you're doing, but there's always somebody that kind of comes along that you can sort of grab onto and they can lift you up or like keep you afloat sort of thing. So just trying to like convey that sort of like desperation, but that sort of like uplifting feeling and trying to like choose the notes of the song that way. So it's kind of like trying to direct the music towards that, and then usually Jess and I kind of just come up with a bunch of things and work back and forth with that, and then usually add on like the lyrics afterwards. It sort of depends. Sometimes the lyrics come first of like what what the kind of content of the song is going to be about, or it's the music and then you kind of like fit the lyrics in and try and sort of convey the meaning there. I think for us, usually the music comes first and then lyrics are kind of secondary. And yeah, maybe a bit more of an afterthought. Um, but yeah, that's kind of usually the writing process for us.
And for you, when you look at the music itself, the guitar sound, how important is for you to develop a guitar sound that becomes the essence of the band or becomes synonymous with the band? Is that a goal for
I
you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's pretty defining. I think, yeah, like, are you thinking more like tonally or like, I mean, because
Both
I
in
think they're
terms of
both,
a
yeah.
tone and style, so that you can
Because I,
like, because I think the goal at the end of the day, like on debut records, is very
Mhm,
easy to follow your heroes and kind of create an album that kind of goes at that image. But I think as you start
mhm,
to develop and as you start to move forward, you start to kind of want it to become the hero yourself, sort of speak, and kind of create a sound, a tone, an execution that becomes the key DNA of who the band is, so that whenever somebody presses play on a track,
mhm,
they're like, "Oh, I know who that is," immediately. So, I
mhm.
mean, some bands don't really care that much because the nature of that sound allows them to be very eclectic, not just from record to record, but even within the records themselves. But I don't get that feeling from you guys. I feel like you guys are pretty much in a pocket, and you know
Mhm.
exactly what you want your sound to be. So that kind of led me to believe that you would want to somewhat in the future kind of define what that sound is.
Yeah, I think, I mean, for me right now, what we're doing is pretty much like I was thinking about this, like when we were kind of doing the recording, I was like, this is pretty much exactly the music that I want to make. I think definitely like trying to define your sound is important. I mean, yeah, I don't really have any thoughts of like exactly where we would go after this. I think sort of doing something pretty similar. But the kind of the other thing though too, not just like guitars alone, I think like that is pretty important. But after like doing all the guitar writing, because we usually write all the guitars first and then go to Weston, the drummer, and JP, the bass player, and they kind of add on their parts. And then we sort of do like, hey, should we rearrange anything or whatever? And it's really interesting, like the way that they interpret what the drums call for or what the bass calls for or even like what the vocals should call for, because at some parts where it's like, okay, well, this should be like more upbeat or like a blast beat or like a skank beat or something. Weston will come up with something totally different and it's like, wow, that was better than I could have even imagined for this part. So I think having like pretty well defined like melody and like kind of the guitars is important, but having that kind of like support like on the back end and second like kind of a second opinion is like kind of pretty big, or like having like other input. um so that's, yeah, something pretty interesting that I've noticed like during our writing processes, things that I thought were going to be like, oh, it's going to be like this, totally different, totally different.
And
um
yeah, sorry.
yeah, no, yeah.
I was just going to say, and going back to your critical ears of listening back and saying, "Oh, we should have done this, should have done that." Uh, have you thought about not just this record and not necessarily with the critical ears of criticizing this record, but looking at it in terms of where can we improve, not as individuals, but as a group? Have you thought about that on where there's the biggest room for improvement for you guys?
um I think maybe personally would be like soloing. I think that I'm pretty happy with a lot of the solos on there, but I think there's still like a lot of room, especially like when you kind of compare yourself to a lot of the like great kind of like modern melodic death metal bands like Morris Principium Est or, oh man, so many, like even like Ensiferum still, or like um Brimir, bands like that, right? It's like those guys are just insane, like insane players. Um, so I think for me, that would be like something to do. Maybe, yeah, I think that's the main thing that really sticks out. Maybe trying to do more like comprehensive like songwriting, but um, I think that's kind of like the main thing that I noticed when I listen to what we're doing. I think I really enjoy like the writing or like the song structure and stuff, but it's like, oh, we could maybe like take it up to the next level, like
on the
trying
solos.
to, yeah, or just
But
technicality even, but
yeah,
sometimes,
infuse a little bit more, a few technical elements into the way the songs are put together. I can
yeah,
see that.
or even like actually maybe trying to do more like instrumentation, like having like a keyboard, like keyboard intros or stuff on like on the backing. I think that kind of also just makes like a little bit more zhuzh, a little bit more like interesting stuff going on
It's
if you
funny you
have
say
like that.
that because one of the things I really liked about this record is that there was none of that.
That's funny.
Because that was like, if you're going, this is how I see it. If you're gonna go with a swampy sound, with a low end production that really gives the record this almost live, in your garage style sound, you don't want the keyboards there. I mean, that's a complete departure from that sound. Then you have to go a little bit more polished, you have to go a little bit more grandiose, and
Yeah,
then you lose that swampiness.
yeah.
So
I
that's
think,
something to think
yeah,
about.
yeah, totally. That is true. You kind of got to like keep that. And I think that would be the tough thing is keeping that right balance of like not going too like over the moon on it. Um, yeah.
It's not an easy balance to find. Like if you mentioned a band like Bremere,
Mhm.
they're the symphonic side of their sound works really well, but the overall sound it's super clean. Now,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
a band like Kalma still has the keyboards there, but they were able to find that balance where you'd still rugged on one end, but you still have the keyboards infusing a lot of melody on the other. And I think the
Yeah,
the
totally.
way they were able to find that balance is to keep the melodies a lot cleaner, and then you keep everything else a lot more rugged, so the two worlds are able to coexist. But there's not many bands that do that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I would say, I mean, I think that was probably the one thing that stuck out for me like listening to Kalma is like they're kind of like they do kind of a bit of everything, but they sort of have a very distinct like when you hear them, you know you kind of know that it's them. And they've sort of like I think, yeah, there's some bands that kind of went the more like uh yeah, super like kind of more produced like melodic death, and then there's sort of that a bit more like rugged kind of like at the gates, sort of like early in flames. That's like that kind of, and they've sort of like picked right in the middle, and yeah, I think it really sticks out. And I think even just like the note selection, that was like the huge thing for me for them, and really influences like what I write is trying to yeah capture that a little like that sort of like minor key, but not too like embellished into like any I don't know, more technical like chording or like scale stuff.
Yeah, because like I was listening to you guys, and I'm like, oh, on one hand, I was like, well, at times this is really rugged, but on the other hand, I don't hear any orchestration that's like completely over the top and killing the songs. So I can actually still listen to what the band would sound like if they were playing live. So it's funny
Yeah.
that you mentioned that, because that, like, what you mentioned is exactly the opposite of one of the things that stuck out to me that I really enjoyed about the record. And speaking of songwriting and songs, was there a track on this album that was a little bit more challenging for you guys to get it to the finish line?
um I think everything was straightforward. I think the one I would say maybe is Terminus, but that's just because that song is, I think, quite different than the rest of them. Like it's a bit more atmospheric. Um, there's still like similar elements to the other songs, but it's just a little bit different. Also, that end section, like after kind of the bridge is just pretty long. So getting everything like synced up properly and like having everything sound like as tight as it does was like, oh man, this is a real workout.
Was an effort.
Yeah. So I think that one, and then just like kind of getting all like the vocal takes done well was like kind of being picky about that. But yeah, I think that would be the one for me. But everything else, because we've been playing the songs for so long, it was mostly just getting in and doing it.
And recording it.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, this is an independent release. So is this an independent release by your choice or a choice that was, thrusted upon you?
Um, I get, yeah, more so just like that was sort of just the only option we had. I think maybe had we wanted to sit a bit longer, we might have had some people interested in helping release it, but part of it was like, okay, well, we've got everything recorded. We sort of want to release the album so we can sort of move on, especially because like well, it's basically been 5 years since we wanted to like start recording, and so it just sort of feels a bit long overdue for us. So it was more so like, okay, well, we'll see if there's anybody out there who's interested in, helping release it. Maybe do like a one album, like get signed for an album or whatever. But it was more so just um yeah, we didn't hear anything back, and there was a few people who was like, oh, we don't have any, anything open right now, but let us know in the future. But yeah, mostly more so just like, okay, we want to move on, get it out the door, and then we can start writing new stuff and yeah, kind of have it all finished.
And speaking of moving on, are you guys doing any release shows for this album? Is there any shows in the horizon?
Yeah, so we'll be doing a release show just here in Vancouver. That's going to be on October 5th. And then we're planning to do a little bit of a tour out to Alberta, trying to get to Calgary and Edmonton. We're still trying to kind of finalize all that, but we haven't, yeah, other than that, we don't have anything too much planned for like a bigger tour. Hopefully, I think next spring, I think we're gonna try and work and get something set up there, but nothing set in stone yet.
So still something to look forward to with that show in October. Last question for you. What music are you listening to right now? Because I'm sure you want to reset your ears from listening to your own stuff.
Yeah.
So what kind of albums, what kind of bands are you listening to right now?
Right now, I feel like I've kind of been going back a little bit, but some new stuff that I've been listening to is Greyhawk's new album. What is it? Spellstone? Let's find out. Yeah, Greyhawk's new album, the new Orden Ogan was pretty dope. I
Oh,
really enjoyed that. They're another big band for me. I think like Gunmen and Ravenhead, those two albums are amazing. Um, those are kind of the main
I
things
actually
right
think the new album
now.
is one of their best albums ever, to be honest with you.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed it. I liked the opening track. Yeah, I think they do some great stuff. They
Yeah.
have some awesome melodies. The vocals are like phenomenal. I think they kind of like everything just works together really, really well. Yeah, so that's kind of I think mostly what I've been listening to. Oh, there was this thrash band from I think over in Chicago, Bloodletter. They're pretty cool. They're a bit more like a melodic thrash kind of outfit. So those guys were pretty cool.
Well,
But
and,
other
and and I guess on your spare time when you're now listening to music, you're watching Star Wars.
yeah, fair bit. I haven't actually watched the new stuff yet. Kind of waiting to see what happens. I was super invested into like a lot of the new TV series, but kind of started falling off a little bit. Yeah.
Well, it's time for you to put your Jedi cape on and get on it. There's a lot of great quality stuff there. Devan, thank you very much for taking the time today to talk to me about the band, about the record. This came out of left field for me. Somebody recommended for me to check you guys out, and they mentioned some bands that if you like, like people always say, if you like this band, you're gonna like this band.
Yeah.
So I got one of those, and I was like, Vancouver boys, let me check them out. Let me see what they're up to. And sure not, you guys really have a cool record together. I like the approach. It's one of those records that I think the album also leaves a lot of questions unanswered more than the ones that it answers. Because the questions that he leaves for me is what does the future hold for you guys? Because I see the potential with this album of what you guys could do even bigger and better going forward. So it's going to be really interesting to follow you guys going forward and see what else you're going to have up your sleeve.
Oh, cool. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot for the kind words. That means a lot. Yeah, no, it's funny. I remember watching you guys doing like a Kalma like video review like for Apollo, I guess in like 2018. And I was like,
Wow,
oh,
that's a
this is
long
pretty
time.
cool. Yeah. So I kind of seen you guys around here and there, and yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I
and
was
and
pretty
I don't
excited
know if
to.
you've met the guys from Calma or not, but next time they're in Vancouver, if you haven't met them, I can arrange for something and you can meet the guys because we've become good friends with them over the years, and I really love that whole crew. I've got to see them live a bunch of times, and they're as cool in person as they are as musicians. So that's always not
Yeah.
always something you find.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to do. I managed to meet them at one show down in Seattle, like for a little meet and greet thing. So I have met them, but I definitely, yeah, be interested in talking to those guys a bit more because, yeah, I've heard really good things about those dudes.
And they have a lot of stories to tell, let me tell you. Have a lot of stories to
Nice.
tell. Great bunch of guys, and I think you guys are on the road to become the Canadian Kalma, and I really have extremely high expectations going forward in terms of what you guys can do and what you guys can deliver. And once again, just thank you for taking the time to talk about the record, to talk about the band. All the best to you and the gang.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks very much for having me. Nice
Take care,
chatting.
man.
Cool.